Okay, here we go.
AI governance, risk and ethics. Just to introduce, my name is Devinder
Ganesan.
My name is Karthik.
I was going to say, this is kind of your bread and butter, so let's start with you.
Absolutely. I feel like you guys are building some very exciting technologies in AI. Yeah. You guys look at risk and how do you quantify it?
Sure. So AI is going to be very interesting in the future. However, the same scale can apply for the risks also. It can impact millions in a second, and it can also cause big disruptions inside organizations also. People try to improve the efficiency internally, but whenever you go for this efficiency, there's always a blind spot that we miss, and then there is a big risk, and a lot of people are impacted. So the risk can be coming from any angle. The most important that we are thinking right now is the privacy, explainability issues, and accountability, how much you can trust this, and how biased is the system, right?
So I'll give you my lens, which is more recently been medical devices and medtech. So the FDA itself takes a risk-based approach, and recently they came out with some guidance, some documentation on both security and AI and how to approach it. But it's also the framework of risk that they use. We can use that in anything that they haven't covered. And if you take a risk-based approach to tackle problems like, can we use a copilot? That's technically using an AI, but the endpoint isn't AI for the user. Human in the loop really helps. And if you come to some of the discussions from a lot of the lawyers around this subject of regulation, you start to see where we can take that risk-based approach and iteratively figure out how we can not only remain compliant, but actually increase our scope. And if you take it, the same conversation about AI to a regulator or to someone who's doing like auditing, with this point of view that no, we're not just going to do what we used to do. We're going to do 10 times more, and it's going to be so much more secure. I think that conversation just goes way better.
Absolutely. I think, Ganesan, you said something very important, which is, as you start to automate more, if you have an error rate of 0.01, and you're automating more and more and more, and you're increasing the likelihood of that 0.01 now actually having a catastrophic effect, your risk goes up the more you automate, right? But the other thing the riskiest thing is the unknown risk, stuff you can't build a framework for, stuff you can't think through, and maybe this is a personal opinion, governments can't think through because they are following what practitioners have seen. These are known risks. Everyone knows how to, when you're driving a car, how to avoid a blind spot. However, if you're building risk, if you're looking at risk in AI, what you want to be looking for is, let's imagine the worst possible thing that can happen. What do you do next? And this is where standard operating procedures are super helpful, because this is where humans need to step in, right? We're always going to have that little piece of risk, and if that's not keeping you up at night, then you don't care enough about your users.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Karthik. And think about it. If you try to create one framework for all of AI, it's huge risk. That is a big risk, because AI is not such a technology that you can use in one part of the business or one industry. It is everywhere. You can use it in so many different ways. So the risk comes out differently if it is used internally in a HR versus a customer services versus somewhere else. You see, risk will be very different in individually these areas within one company. But then think about different industries. Yeah. And if you just say that, okay, hey, I give you this framework and it is going to solve all the issues, that's completely wrong. So that's why I asked the first question, what is your business? What is the problem you're solving through AI? What is going in? What is coming out? And you got to make sure it is individualized, and it's basically more personalized. I would say it's like a personalized medicine. The AI should be a personalized.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, personalized AI governance. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
Bias and fairness. This is a very different take, right? Because now one of the early projects I worked on had to really account for a much larger population in skin analysis,
Right.
And there's similar things that come across in AI all the time. They make huge headlines in the news.
Right.
Are we doing enough to address bias and unfairness or fairness in AI? And what are approaches that we can take to do a better job?
Yeah, I can start. I think, definitely you can look at bias from a technical perspective of bias in the data set. So if you are looking at, hey, we're going to build a generative AI, built on top of some of the open source models that are already out there. Well, first of all, a lot of those open source models were trained on the heap, which is pretty much the internet. And so right off the bat, you have a bias of folks that are not on the internet, right? So what you really need to think about is how are you going to get gold standard data set that will cover a certain amount of population that you're going to keep in scope. You can't go after everything, but what you can definitely try to do is chart out a map of when to use AI for different populations. There's a very classic example that's used in bias. If you pick up a bias book, you'll see it very often, which is Muslim women in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They rarely get health care. And the reason why is it's a cultural bias that's built into that community. But in fact, they're one of the most prolific users of AI technology because they can ask questions in private. Unfortunately, because they've never been on the internet talking about their issues in the way that they think, large language models are completely blind to them. And in fact, we've seen other type of biases like this where, computer vision models were trained on predominantly white males, so black people were completely invisible to computer vision models. And these are difficult topics to talk about, but as AI practitioners, we have to be transparent that our data sets are probably always going to be biased. So if you know the bias in your data set, make sure you have, transparently putting it out there. Hey, we're not ready to serve you yet, but in fact, if you would work with us, we would love to improve our data set. That transparency is going to build trust.
Very nicely said, Karthik. So I put, okay, if bias is a poison, then what is the antidote? Diversity, right?
Yeah.
You go, more diversity you bring in, the more bias is reduced, and the fairness comes in. So in this spectrum, if you train your data with more and more diverse data sample, then the possibility of bias decreases. But it's never going to be zero, like Karthik said. It's always going to be there. And recognizing that, and you may want to have some thresholds. Like if you are saying, I'm going to serve these clients, these are these problems that I'm going to solve, that's where, the experts should identify, all these problems can be mitigated.
Yep.
It's just that we need to be aware, be proactive. Let's start doing some work on this. We need to make sure you are parallelly taking care of both of them to be very successful. Mm-hmm. So that's something I
think the only thing I have to add to these two wonderful answers is that we can take a lot of lessons learned from previous technologies. Mm-hmm. A lot of the AI utilized today around LLMs is essentially search. Mm-hmm. And we have a corpus of data on how to do search and give better bias endpoints, right? I think there's opportunities to really ramp up and almost bootstrap how you do it for AI in a meaningful way very, very quickly.
Yeah, 100%. I think, leveraging past data sets is actually something I think a lot of generative AI practitioners don't do today. There's a lot of machine learning data sets that you can find like on really old school data sets. There are tabular data sets, have literally nothing to do with generative AI, but those are grounded in truth because they were qualified and built very well together. Those lessons are still there. I wouldn't say fear, but the trepidation that I have is, and maybe a question for you guys, is as more and more AI is generating data, more synthetic data sets are coming out, we're seeing a bleeding into ground truth, right? AI is feeding itself over and over again. So if you are building AI products, you really have to think about how will you capture ground truth without human in the loop. And what you need to think about is natural feedback. Natural feedback is, what you were talking about, search. Top 5 ranking. Are they being selected 80% of the time, right? If you're giving a response back, is someone using it downstream for an actual productivity task or an objective? If that's not happening, you don't have real lessons.
I think I'll take one aspect of this. Human in the loop, I think, is really important. And there are cases when it doesn't necessarily get there. but there's such a huge area of learning in terms of evals that needs to happen for when we have to go without human in the loop.
Yep.
Evals, we're just starting to learn about evals like in a whole new way, especially as people are trying to figure out what to do with agents, what to do with the re-rankers, what to do with a rank-based approach. Evals are beginning to blow up. And if we do it the right way, and I still maintain that human in the loop needs to be a huge part of it, but evals might be the beginnings of like at least establishing the numbers, and then we can run some stats on what is the likelihood of this data set, because the evals are going to give you some numbers on the likelihood of how this stuff is right or wrong. You can run some stats and make that part of your quality report. This is the likelihood of this data set being, good versus not, and that quality needs to overall improve over time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There were two recent papers that I saw recently that kind of excited me about eval and the potential for going in the future. One of those was Meta's latest model that came out that was focused on not using tokenizers for inputs. Now, this is particularly exciting because right now, everything that we feed into large language models go through a tokenizer, and there's an inherent bias in the tokens, right? Because they were trained on specific type of languages that are Latin-based, right? Although we can switch those tokens and we can say, hey, LLM can pick up which token in another language, there's a fundamental knowledge, that is lost in stuff like poetry, right? You read some of the poems in different languages and it's off, right? Because fundamentally, those type of intuitions are not built in. But now we're getting new models that come out that completely don't look at tokenizers. They're not tokenized. I forgot the name of it, but take a look on Meta's research paper. You'll find it. And there are new concepts that are coming out. I think they're going to proliferate very, very quickly, and there's going to be a race to a bottom of implementing those. But is there an awareness yet? I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I think very important. I think humans need to make that decision, but the process can be automated. So,
yeah, I think we're not going to get away from that, right? If there's still more trust in a human's decision, AI tells me something and says, hey, go take this medication, it has no skin in the game because it can't lose its medical license. So will we see licensing for medical AI? Maybe it's a thing we need to think about.
Yep. No, I think I also want to clarify here, what we are talking about as decisions is not about the AI's decisions, right? Mm-hmm. The AI's decisions come out, that's an output. And those decisions, are they in line with our, whatever the business requirements or ethical considerations or risk plans, right?
Right.
So those are the decisions that we call them agent HRs, right?
Yeah,
right?
I love that.
It's basically, there are AI agents, but then there needs to be HR for that agents.
Yeah.
Okay, if they are working properly and if they made a decision, okay, is that right or wrong? If there is a problem, then immediately the HR has to find out and say okay, there is a channel, they will work out and then say, okay, no, this decision is wrong, we may have to correct it.
Yeah.
So that is the process I'm talking about that needs to be automated in the governance side. Mm-hmm. And I think it is pretty much very easily can be done. Like Karthik said, the trust starts from internally. Yes, it starts internally, but then a third-party validation will also help you even more trust it.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, that gets down to the accountability question of ethics, right? If AI makes a mistake, and this was the first question that happened with auto driving for Tesla, and the question was who's liable in an accident? So who's liable in malpractice if the AI makes a mistake? Is it the person who trained, the person who collected the data set? Is it the person who approved that AI to be used? Those questions go down fundamentally to skin in the game, right? If the AI can keep functioning with no one being willing to take the liability for mistakes, should we trust it?
essentially, the builder and the user both are being sued. Nowadays, we are hearing a lot of news from that.
Yeah.
I think it's very risky times. I think it is time to be responsible. I think we can get away from it right now, but the near future is we need to be careful.
Yeah, if you read through the contracts or if you just talk to attorneys in the field right now, let's say if I'm using a model on Azure, right? The liability for Microsoft is fairly limited. I can't just point to Microsoft and say they told me so. It's on you, and it's impossible to build those billion-dollar models, at least for now. I mean, there's plenty good models,
Right.
but at least for now, you have some dependency on these mega models.
Yep.
And you don't have a framework for responsibility that goes all the way up the chain. So maybe that'll change over time, but it also puts the onus on you, the user of the AI, to put into place systems based on statistical analysis, in my opinion, that give you a very clear idea of what it is that you're giving your customers. When you have that, you have something to stand on.
Yeah, I mean, there was this case recently, I don't know if you heard Character AI, where it told a teenager who, in my opinion, probably shouldn't have been using that app in the first place, and that teenager ended up committing suicide because the Character AI bot told him to, right? And that is, the company's still around. There's no accountability to say, hey, have you fixed that problem? And without that, I think, there's a competitive advantage, as I said. Someone else makes the Character AI and say, hey, we actually solved, not only do we solve the problem, but we do statistical analysis to show you what we know about the risk and what we don't know, and we know when to shut off the AI to prevent situations like this. That inherent trust will be built with the marketplace, and how we're going to change the game. But it's going to be market forces. It's going to be consumers demanding accountability for this. So
we're about to see a big sort of bomb in terms of like multimodal expressions of models.
That's going to be so interesting.
Because I was checking out this demo from Voyage AI yesterday, and essentially, you don't even need to do the intermediate steps for engineering anymore. You can take an image, the model will figure out the text inside it by itself. It'll still put your, it'll still place your embeddings very close to where they need to be, so you can get very reasonable outputs.
All right.
How do you test something like that? How do you talk about it, right? It's crazy, but it's so much fun to be in this space to start thinking about these problems.
Yeah, we need to make sure we remember that it's an automaton, it's a statistical pair, it's only guessing the next word. And so it becomes our responsibility, to put those human aspects in that automaton.
Yeah.
Yep, and thinking about this LLM, I think there's a recent publication in Nature Medicine. It's a very important paper I think everybody should read. The authors, what they did was, they tried to poison the data out there that's been used by LLMs to trained. What they did was, they tried to find out how much minimum information that I should put in, right? That could actually change the LLM's decision or its output. Found that even with 0.001% of whatever data that is out there, all they need is only the percentage of information that is poisonous. That is enough for LLM to change its way that it is giving decisions.
Can you imagine the misinformation?
It's misinformation, and that's really crazy. So we have to be very cognizant about all these things. This is going to happen, but how can you mitigate this? Is, okay, testing.
That's right.
Input, output, what is coming out. Use third party to do that. Be safe.
And build standard operating procedures for when stuff is going to go wrong, because it will.
I think exactly that line. I was like, it's kind of a side effect of the fact that attention is all you need.
Yeah, we got to make sure our system is safe. We cannot control a lot of other things.
Yeah, I can't even pick stocks.
Yes.
All right, let's give a big hand to Karthik,
so much.
Ganesan, Devinder. Thank you very much.